Hello, everyone. It's our great pleasure today to have Dr. Alessia Tranchese here today to speak about the language of misogyny. Alessia is a senior lecturer in communication and applied linguistics, and she has and she has published on the language of misogyny and violence against women and the impact of pornography on this. She's also critically analyzed the language used in media reports on rape. And outside of academia, she's also active. She's worked with organizations and think tanks that support victims of sexual violence and campaign to prevent it, like Rape Crisis or Zero Tolerance. Today, she's going to speak to us about her research spanning over multiple corpora. And she will make the case that online misogyny is not the form of extremism, but in its subtle form, it's actually an everyday phenomenon. So I'm very excited to hand over to you, Alessia. And if you have any questions, you can put them into the chat and we will enable microphone functions after the talk. And we are very excited to hear them. So over to you, Alessia.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Michael, for the introduction, for inviting me to speak here today. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope it works. If you could just let me know once that's done, that would be great. Okay, can you see my screen and my presentation?
Yes, we can.
You can, and you can see the presentation mode, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much again for inviting me. Like you said before, Stephanie, I am senior lecturer in communication and applied linguistics at the University of Portsmouth, and my research lies at the intersection between linguistics, media studies, and feminism. So today I will be talking about the findings of three research projects that I have worked on over the years. Some of them are some older projects, and some of them are still very much work in progress. So projects that I'm currently working on. So what I'm trying to do, and what I will try to do in this presentation, is to look at what these different projects have got in common, and what I have found in different online spaces about online misogyny, and with the aim of finding similarities across different practices. What I want to do is, while obviously my presentation today is called Discourse of Online Misogyny, I want to start by saying that I don't want to give the impression that online misogyny is separate from offline misogyny, or that it is a problem or a niche problem of the internet. At the same time, I don't want to try to give the impression that there is a separation between extreme and mundane misogyny. So while I do talk about online spaces, my argument is very much that there is a continuum between different online and offline practices, and that online spaces are just one place of human interaction where misogyny can manifest itself. However, for the sake of clarity, given that I'm looking at online spaces, I'm going to call it online misogyny. Okay, so sorry. Okay, so in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, there is a brief outline here about, first of all, defining misogyny, my working definition for this project, and the difference between misogyny and sexism. And then I will talk about technology-facilitated misogyny, which is perhaps a better way of defining online misogyny. And then I will talk about the three case studies that I mentioned earlier. So online pornography, the incel forum on Reddit that was shut down in 2017, and online sex bias reviews. And I will conclude by looking and discussing common threads in online misogyny. I have to give a content warning because, as you can imagine, this presentation includes vulgar and graphic content of sexual and violent nature that some could find disturbing. However, when I say graphic, I don't mean images. Even if I am looking at images in my new project on pornography, I have not included these in this presentation. Okay, so starting with misogyny, there are different ways of defining misogyny, but the definition that I am using is the definition given by Kate Manne in her book Down Girl, published in 2017. Which sees misogyny as a tool to enforce a patriarchal social order. By patriarchal social order, we mean a world in which women have a lower status than men because they're seen as naturally inferior to men. So the fact that this is seen as a natural thing makes it more difficult to challenge because it is seen as something that cannot be changed. Obviously, even socially constructed differences are very difficult to dismantle, but there is something less fixed about them. Obviously, in this definition, misogyny doesn't work in the opposite direction. We could talk about, you know, the not all men hashtag, or we could talk about misandry. It's not really the space to do that here, but the point is that misogyny targets women because they're women, so it cannot work vice versa. So I have put here this image in the definition of misogyny because I think it's actually quite a good image for this word, because it really conveys the idea that is part of the definition of misogyny. That misogyny is not just about violence and aggression. Misogyny functions by policing women's behavior and punishing bad women. But this doesn't necessarily happen through physical violence. It can happen via, for example, silencing women. So there's a hand covering a woman's mouth to say that that's a form of misogyny, and there's a hand trying to strangle a woman. So physical violence, that's also a form of misogyny. So misogyny can go from banter to physical violence, and these are all ways to maintain women's subordination in society. And another important aspect is that misogyny is not just the problem of a single individual. So we're not talking about a specific man or a specific small groups of men who are ill or mad, for example, as we hear when men kill women. But it is a social problem that needs to be treated as such, as a systemic problem that is supported by a network of practices. So another aspect of misogyny that often is neglected but is actually really important, because it's almost like the other side of the coin, is that hostility or hate, if we take the etymological meaning of misogyny, is not the only way to maintain this social order. Misogyny involves a system that rewards good women, for example, good mothers or cool girlfriends. So a woman, for example, or a girl who decides to engage in sexual acts that she doesn't want to engage with because she wants to keep her boyfriend happy, or because she's worried that he will divulge her private images, is treated as a good woman because she is complying with the system. And so she's less likely, not that that's impossible, but it's less likely to be the object of physical direct hatred or violence. Generally, these women who police their own behavior and sometimes the behavior of other women are treated with less violence. And sometimes, as we will see in this presentation, they're also overtly praised and appreciated for their behavior, because this allows the system, the patriarchal system, to be maintained and be sustained by these actions. However, even when overt misogynistic actions are not visible, the sexist views that underpin these practices remain. And how does this work? For example, an example of a few examples I can give you of misogyny is sexualization or otherization of women, or for example, dismissing women or disbelieving women. These are all practices that have effects on women's lives in different ways, but these are supported by ideological beliefs. So, for example, we sexualize women or otherize women because we believe that they are an extension of men, or we dismiss women because we believe that they are irrational, or we disbelieve women because we believe that they are liars. So these are the sexist ideological positions that legitimize then the actions that we take as a consequence of these beliefs. And as you can see, this can go from something what can look like is quite trivial, like, for example, thinking that women are always complaining or moaning about things because we think that they are irrational, to something that looks a lot more serious and in some ways obviously has more serious consequences on women's lives. So together, the system of misogyny and sexism creates and maintains a world in which women have a lower place than men. Now, moving on to the online spaces and the digital technologies, like I said, misogyny exists in many different forms, with a whole series of different ways in which women's conformity can be enforced, and including through digital technologies. However, like I said earlier, digital technologies did not cause misogyny and did not pre-exist these sexist ideology, but it's actually the other way around. They were overwhelmingly being created by people who were socialized and conditioned by patriarchal structures. So, like I said earlier, and I'm just going to give you some examples here. I could give you a lot more examples. Misogyny and sexism exist in popular culture in many different aspects, not just online. You know, in the advertising that we see every day, in films and TV series or video games. Like here, for example, there is an image from a Grand Theft Auto where men are allowed to pay for sex with women in prostitution and then kill them. And this is very much part of popular culture. So the online world is not an exception. However, we should also acknowledge that digital technologies have created new ways for hatred to advance, and particularly to disseminate in unprecedented ways. So I am going to look at the three case studies that I mentioned earlier, with the aim to look at discursive connections between these practices, between extreme and mundane misogyny, and between what online and offline harm, and how these often bleed into each other. So I'm starting with my most recent study, which is very much in progress, and it's a study of violence against women in mainstream online pornography. So first of all, I'm going to define pornography. And I'm using the definition given by Dworkin and McKinnon, which is pornography is the sexually explicit subordination of women, graphically depicted, whether in pictures or in words. So this definition is obviously not the only definition of pornography. There is disagreement over what pornography is, but in this definition, which is the one I am adopting here, pornography has got nothing to do with nudity, for example, or even with sexual acts per se, but it is about the sexual exploitation of women, particularly the commercial sexual exploitation of women, given the hugely lucrative nature of the pornographic industry. So the legitimation of this violence in pornography and through pornography is supported by two main ideas. The first one, and is perhaps the core of this legitimation, is that pornography is not real. Pornography is fantasy, is a distortion, and therefore should be protected as freedom of speech. The second underlying assumption that justifies the existence of pornography and violence in pornography is that women enjoy sexual mistreatment. This is a sexist belief, if we think about the point I was making earlier about misogyny and sexism, we could say that this is the sexist ideology that then legitimizes the practice. So women enjoy sexual mistreatment. Therefore, if we see mistreatment pornography, it's not problematic because women have consented to it. And this is very much used as a justification for a lot of violence that we see in pornography. Moving on to the study that I have carried out, I looked at the 26 most viewed videos in the amateur category on a major adult platform, a global platform, but the settings were UK and in English. I studied two aspects of this of these videos. It's 26 because these are the videos that appear on the first page when people click on the amateur category. So tags are those little labels that are attached to videos. A tag can be attached to many videos, and a video can have many different tags. So I looked at over 8,000 of these tags, only those that were attached to at least 100,000 videos, because otherwise there would have been too many tags. They were not very relevant. They were scraped from the internet with Parse Hub, and then because obviously the amount of data was so large, initially I had to do an automated semantic categorization using a Python library called Sentence Transformer, and then these were categorized into mainstream porn taxonomies, for example, Asian or anal, and so on. We will have a look at these later. The other aspect of these websites that I looked at is comments under the videos. There were over 18,000 comments that I scraped and translated it automatically with Python, again with Google Trans. The reason for this is that there would have been too much data loss if all the comments that were not in English had been removed. And obviously some of the translations might not have been accurate, but I thought that it would be better to retain that data, also to have an idea of what people were saying, even if they were not speaking English. So these were analyzed, again, too much data to process just manually or even with traditional corpus analysis tools. So I carried out a semantic analysis, a sentiment analysis using TextBlob, which again is a Python library, to categorize comments into positive and negative. And then I processed these using corpus analysis, especially collocation analysis. And then obviously I looked at the broader context of where these comments were produced and how they were shared in line with critical discourse analysis. So there was a combination of quantitative and qualitative methods to analyze this pornographic content and to highlight how misogyny is embedded and produced in mainstream pornography. So this is a visual representation of the most frequent tag semantic categories. So basically all these tags were automatically categorized based on their semantics into broader categories, which are the ones that you can see here. Now these tags, this visual representation is not based on the tag itself, as obviously a tag can be attached to different videos, but it is based on the total number of videos that were ever uploaded in with that tag. So this reflects content production trends and also consumption and demand. So the videos that were most frequently uploaded and viewed. So as you can see, the three largest groups are race and ethnicity, youth and teen, and mature. And youth and teen and race and ethnicity are particularly in line with what pornography research has told us so far. There is a fetishization of youth in pornography, particularly of very young women, but also that in addition to sexist beliefs, there is also a rife racist culture in online pornography. But what is also interesting here is that the violence and coercion category is only 5%. However, if we put it together with submission and humiliation, we have 7% and +5. So we have the same amount, same percentage as youth and teen and mature pornography. So mature women, that is. This tells us there's two points that need to be made here. The first is that we're saying that at least 12% of the content that I analyzed was of the tags that I analyzed contained overt violent content, or at least it was tagged as such. But at the same time, this is probably an underestimation because of the way the tagging system works. So there's a lot of content in pornography that is not overtly tagged as violent. For example, some tags are surprise or unexpected. And these refer to sexual acts where women are made to engage in sexual acts that they are not aware of. It is obviously impossible to know whether it is an act or whether these women were actually not aware of what was going to happen. But the point is that this content is not tagged as violent. The words surprise or unexpected are not tagged as violent by this automated system. So there is an issue with the automated categorization system itself that has not been trained to recognize this type of to recognize these words as potentially problematic in the context of pornography. And so there is the issue that we also need to look at how these AI models are trained when it comes to violence against women, if they are fit for purpose. And so a lot of this content in online pornography might be violent, but is not really represented here. So we have to take this as an underestimation. And then moving on to the analysis of user comments, like I said, I started with a sentiment analysis to provide an overview of the general tone of the comments. And as you can see here, I don't know if you will find this surprising or not, the majority of these comments were tagged as positive. So 70% was tagged as positive comments. So users exhibit a dominance of positive reviews for the videos that they have seen or the actors that they have seen. But this does not imply, and we should not assume that this implies absence of misogyny. Like I said earlier, misogyny works by rewarding women who comply with the system. So even seemingly appreciative comments can actually hide a more complex relationship between viewers and the actors of the videos that they are watching. So I'm going to show you some of the text of these comments in a little bit more detail, just to give you an idea of what I found. So when I looked at the comments that had been tagged as positive by the sentiment analysis, the most frequent lexical word was love. And when I looked at the collocation pattern of love in this corpus, I saw that the most common collocate, the strongest collocate of love was woman, followed by videos, way, and cock. I'm going to show you some examples of this in context. So first of all, what is it that users love about women? And as you can see in these examples, they seem to refer to a particular type of women, for example, a pregnant woman or a Latino woman, or as you can see in this example in line 2, there is a clear reference to another website where these women can be found. So a clear evidence of how women in this context are considered a commodity that men can pick and choose from based on their preferences. So this reflects a little bit the tagging practice as well, because the tagging in itself is a choice of categories, including categories of women. If we look at the next common collocate of love is the way, which refers to the many different ways in which women fulfill men's fantasies. And a lot of it has got to do with engaging in different types of sexual acts, particularly dangerous or potentially degrading. There's also a reference to women loving the way women reflect or respect stereotypical feminine standards, for example, with words like beautiful or perfect. But there is also two examples that seem to be contradictory, but actually they make perfect sense in this context. So in line 4, the person is saying, I love the way she plays with it. She's very happy to have that massive meat. So this reflects what I was saying earlier about the idea that women engage in willingly and consensually engage in sex that is degrading, potentially painful or harmful. The example in line 5 says, I love the way she innocently discourages him. I love those innocent facial expressions. This is almost the opposite. This person is praising a woman who fits in more with the stereotype of the submissive, passive woman rather than a woman who is promiscuous or a woman who enjoys sex. So we might see this as two contradictory aspects of these comments, but in reality, they make sense if you think about the women who are in these videos. They are women in the sex trade, and women in the sex trade are women whose role, whose feminine role is to fit into a fantasy. And therefore, these women are exactly doing what they're expected to do, to fulfill a fantasy, whatever that might be. So we're not talking about women who are expected to be virginal, like a mother or a sister or a wife, but we're talking about women whose role is to fulfill sexual fantasies. The next common collocate is cock, like I said, is also dick, but in this case, I've only got examples with this collocate. And you can see that a lot of references are about they're racializing this word, like in some of the examples here about a black cock, and also there's a lot of emphasis on the size. So again, feeding into racial tropes and stereotypes. But another interesting aspect here is the change of the subject of love. In the first examples that I showed you, the subject was often I, so the person who was writing. But here, the subject seems to be the women who love this particular type of sexual attribute in their mind, or in the way they are choosing to present this in this forum. But it's a particular type of woman that is a wife who likes this particular sexual attribute. And there are some, this is interesting because there is resonance with a lot of what is discussed in incel forums, as we will see later, but also with the Pellicot case in France, where we saw how these fantasies were not just talked about, but they were actually enacted. So again, the separation between offline and online real life becomes more blurry. Okay, I'm moving on to the next example that I have from my project. It's a project about the incel forum. They used to be active on Reddit in 2017, but was then shut down. I published this research in this paper in Violence Against Women. So if you want to know more about it, feel free to check it out, because obviously I will not have time to talk about it in detail today. But just for context, and I'm sure most of you here by now know what incel means. It's a portmanteau word from involuntary celibate, and the term refers to heterosexual men who blame women for their lack of sexual or romantic experience. And they are known for propagating misogyny online and offline. So unlike pornography, where there is a big divide between those who support it and those who are pro or anti-porn, with incels in the mainstream, at least, obviously we are talking about the mainstream here. There is generally an agreement that incels are dangerous, or they are they have been rightly called a terrorist group in some spaces, in some contexts. So we are, in theory, talking about two very different things, or two things that don't have a lot in common. In this study, I compared this incel subreddit with a general Reddit corpus. And as a method, I used, again, corpus linguistics methods, especially keyword and collocation analysis, to look at how misogyny manifests in this online space. Unfortunately, I do not have time to go through all the keywords and collocations, but I'm going to show you a couple of examples to kind of connect to what I was saying earlier about pornography. So woman is one of the words that incels used to talked about most frequently compared to the rest of Reddit in their subreddit forum. And this is the word sketch from Sketch Engine of the most frequent collocates of woman in this corpus, particularly when woman is in the position of grammatical subject. What I want to show you is some examples of when women are represented as doing or not doing something in this context. So when women don't do something or are represented as not doing something in the forum, incels were normally talking about things that women didn't like or didn't want. And often this was preceded by or combined with a quantifier like many or most. In examples like, most women don't like it soft, they like it rough, hard, and deep. So here there is a clear resonance with what we saw in the comments on the pornography websites. This idea again that women are interested in degrading, painful, harmful sex. But the interesting thing in the incel forum, and to a certain extent we could say is the same in the posts that we saw in the pornography data set, the things that men or incels here represent women as doing or not doing are mental processes. So things that we cannot possibly know for sure. So it's something that's happening in women's mind. Unless they tell us, we don't know for sure. And even if they tell us, we don't know that that's true or not. So these discussions are mostly speculative. There is a lot of speculation based on tropes and stereotypes of what women like or dislike. The other word that is very common on the incel forum, or was common on that forum, is Chad. You might be familiar with this terminology. In the incel hierarchy, Chad is the alpha male. He embodies hypermasculinity, most clearly expressed through their supposed sexual prowess. And what is interesting, again, resonating with what I said earlier about the obsession with the penis as a weapon and the size of the penis, is that with Chad, the penis is very much weaponized, especially to hurt women. And some of the most frequent collocates with Chad, so the modifiers of Chad were cock and thundercock, which is supposed to be the surname of this imaginary prototype of a man. So here are some of the examples that we found on the you would have been able to find on the forum back in 2017. Of how they used the penis as a weapon to harm women. For example, here to talk about a giant cock ravaging your insides, the insides of a woman. And again, the idea that Black men in particular have these physical attributes that are dangerous and scary, but that's at the same time what women want, because on the other hand, women are presented as never being hurt or satisfied. Like in this particular example, where a woman is presented as immediately hopping from one to the other. Okay, I'm moving on now to the last case study that I want to discuss here, which is sex bias reviews. This is a more recent study, which I published in Feminist Media Studies. Again, if you're interested in, it's an open open access paper, because I will not have time to go into the detail of all of this. It's a study that looks at a popular punter review website, and in this project, I analyzed the reviews published over a period of more than 20 years. And what I did is I compared positive and negative reviews left by sex buyers on this website. Here, so the difference with the pornography data set is that the positive and negative distinction wasn't done with an automated sentiment analysis, but it was labeled by the sex buyers themselves as either positive or recommended or not recommended reviews. So the question that I had is, what makes punters leave a positive or a negative review for a woman in prostitution? So first of all, let's look at what these men presented as recommended. So something that they liked, enjoyed about the encounter. These are the clusters that you can see here are the key clusters that I extracted from the recommended reviews when compared to the non-recommended reviews. So instead of looking at keywords, I used key clusters as they would give a better idea of the themes that were represented in that corpus compared to the other. And these can be grouped broadly into four areas. So sex buyers liked, enjoyed, or appreciated women who had a good body. Or what they defined as good sex, which, as we will see, is basically any sex that they require and they're not denied. It can be the girlfriend experience, so to say, but it has to be something that they requested and they were not denied. And then they appreciated good facilities and also a good personality. Again, what constitutes a good personality is what is interesting, especially when we compare it with non-recommended reviews. When we see non-recommended reviews, there are three main groups, and it's the women who received negative reviews were those who had a bad attitude or a fake profile, or women who wasted the sex buyers' time or money. Perhaps with the exception of fake reviews, the other two categories are are very vague, and they're a lot less specific than all the details that we can see here in the recommended reviews. So the question is, what constitutes a bad attitude and in some cases a waste of time or a waste of money? When we look at these reviews in more detail, we see that a bad attitude for these men is basically women setting sexual boundaries, which in their words become complaints. So here are some extracts from some of these negative reviews where a woman setting sexual boundaries is referred to as complaining, or a woman who is presenting a litany of do's and don'ts, or a routine of denials of certain requests. So once sexual boundaries are presented as complaints, they are easily dismissed because they're no longer violating the sexual freedom of a person and a woman's sexual boundaries. And here we can see examples of how these sex buyers overtly talk about how they try to push sexual boundaries and trying to get women to do things that they do not want to do, entitled here by the financial transaction. So these reviews are not simply distasteful or sexist, but they are also a tool, a misogynistic tool to get women to comply, because the threat of negative reviews is very much a threat in real life. So again, blurring that line between online and offline misogyny. It's very much a true risk for women, and it has a real effect on their lives. As sex buyers reveal themselves by telling other sex buyers how they often complain to these women's pimps or the agencies that they work for when they don't get what they want. So potentially really putting them at risk of further harm through the agencies or their pimps. So negative reviews are not just a punishment for a bad attitude, which means for setting boundaries, for not doing what men feel entitled to, but they're also a way to get them to comply next time, because obviously this becomes a real threat that affects women's decisions when they are with their sex buyers. Okay, I'm going to conclude because I know that I have almost spoken for 40 minutes. So I just want to conclude by saying what I found in these 3 projects that is common in all of them. So common threads in online misogyny. So first of all, what I found is that women who comply with stereotypical gender roles, feminine roles, obtain appreciation. For example, beauty standards, but also standards of submission. Women who do not comply with these standards or break the rules, for example, women who are promiscuous, if they do so for the benefit of men, they also receive appreciation. It is women who don't comply who are the ones who are most likely at risk of retaliation. So this applies in spaces that are overtly recognized as misogynistic, like incel forums, in the more mainstream pornographic spaces, and also in spaces that are somewhere in between, like the sex buyers reviews. So the question is, where do we draw the line between these extreme and mundane practices? And is it meaningful to draw this line? Is it helpful? Or is it better to try to see these as different faces of the same problem? Because the effect that they have in different ways is to tell women who is in control and what will happen to them if they don't comply. For example, they will be silenced, or they will be scared, or they will be physically hurt. So separating them will only make it difficult to see the connections. And this is why I'm trying to do with my work, is to actually try to put them back together to be able to see the full picture. Okay, and these are some of my references if you're interested. And thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to have a chat about this now. I'm going to stop sharing now.